Welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. A number of times on this program, I previously had the aviation and UFO historian Michael Schratt on, where we have discussed some old UFO cases, some totally forgotten, others well-known, but all unappreciated, particularly since Michael has been behind a separate effort, not simply knowing all of these old UFO cases, which he knows as well as anybody, but to have them illustrated, often doing the illustrations himself or hiring out other individuals to do these first-rate depictions of cases, really to bring them to life in a way that they deserve. And Michael and I have done this a few times before. We are back for yet another installment to talk about a number of cases that look to me to be landing cases or near landing cases, occasionally with a few sightings of occupants in them, in those objects. So we can talk about all that. Michael, it is a pleasure to have you back.
Richard, great to be with you.
Yeah. Well, we should jump right in. I guess I should ask you, is there anything that unifies these particular cases that we are about to discuss?
In a way there is, because when you start looking at this, Richard, as you know, you start picking up on this pattern recognition where certain features within these cases throughout ufology, they keep repeating over and over again. Like sometimes we see tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of these craft. We hear this electrical humming noise like an electrical transformer or sewing machine. A lot of times it's a CE2 where car engines or lights go out, TVs go out. So this pattern recognition is kind of written or sewn through the tapestry of this research.
Yes, indeed. And I'm just looking ahead at the images that you've sent me, and I'll be dropping all of these into the videos when they appear on YouTube.
Cool.
There's a certain commonality that at least some of them have. We can get into that, but in terms of the shape of the craft, in terms of the lights that they display, some of them look quite similar to me. And only a few of these cases had I been familiar with beforehand. Most of these seem fairly fresh to me, so I'm really looking forward to going over them with you. And am I right? I don't know which one you want to start with. So
I want to start at the earliest case and then work our way through there to the latest cases.
Is that the 1956 case?
Yeah, 1956, correct.
Yeah, this is one I think you got from Wendell Stevens. Am I?
I got this from
right
Wendell Stevens. That's correct.
Yeah, so I didn't know about this one. So jump right in and let's talk about this.
All right, so two quick things. Number one, all these cases are documented. They have paperwork, reference material, documentation to back these up. So it's not like I'm just making this out of the clear air. They do have a paper trail. And number two, credit goes to Tom Bogan for doing these illustrations. So it's kind of my job to dig these things out, get boots on the ground, go places where maybe other researchers don't want to go, and then pull these over and then just try to make these cases come alive. That's the whole goal of this whole thing.
Major congratulations to Tom Bogan. He's done so many of these. His illustrations are just outstanding. He's not the only artist you've worked with. They're all really superb, but Bogan, we used him a lot, and his work is really good.
Right. So here we go, Richard. It's Danielson, Connecticut, November 20th, 1956. Source material, as we mentioned, was Wendell Stevens' collection. Elise Krajewski is the primary eyewitness on this case. Now, it was 12:45 p.m., so it's early the next morning, and we know this because she said in the report, a 3-page report, that she went to bed at 1 a.m., somewhere right around there. So we know it was very late in the evening, early the next morning. So
if I 12:35, you mean to say a.m., I'm thinking, since it's after midnight.
I guess a.m., yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So she's outside hanging up clothes. Now, what she was doing at that time, hanging up clothes, who knows? But that's what the report.
That's a manic mom of the 50s. That's what that is.
The children were asleep inside the house, and she saw, kind of this light moving to her location over the horizon, and kind of coming toward the north to her location. And she originally thought that this was a plane. It made no noise. It was shaped like a half sphere. It was 25 feet across, and it was kind of made of this translucent plastic material where you could kind of see through it. It was about an inch thick, and it had this sort of a yellow glowing light inside the craft itself. And she also noticed that it had no seams, no windows, no doors, no visible means of propulsion. She talked about there being 24 multicolored lights on the bottom of the craft, and the whole craft was revolving in a clockwise fashion. Mm-hmm. And she originally saw this craft hovering near the top of 2 pine trees, and then this craft descended and started moving toward her. She actually got out of the way because she thought that this thing was going to snap through the clothesline. That's how close this thing got up. So then it rose vertically and then started moving over her house and nearly hit the chimney of her house she talked about. And that's the point, Richard, where she got a very good look on the bottom of this craft. And I think this is the part that is really interesting. What she described seeing were these 24 sockets, and each socket was composed of 3 rings or donuts, and the rings were separated by 2 black bands. On the bottom side of each of these rings or donuts, it looked like this ancient Arabic language or writing that she couldn't decipher. It also looked like the borders of a Persian or Oriental rug, or the inscriptions that you might see on Mayan or Inca pottery. That's the way she described it. Very interesting.
It's fascinating. It's a fascinating case. I would like to talk about some of the features of this, and I know we're not quite done with this sighting, or is that everything?
No,
Did she
go ahead,
describe how
Richard. Go ahead.
Well, a couple of things stand out to me. So one, the object is depicted here as shining a light directly on her. So is that part of her account that it hit her with a beam of
described
light?
More of an illuminating light that came from inside that kind of enveloped the localized area here. That's the way she described it.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm seeing 2 in the illustration by Tom Bogan. There's 2 sources of light. There's the craft, but then there's actually a side light on the house, and they seem to kind of overlap with each other. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's what. But still, the light looks like it's coming down potentially on her. The object itself, the pattern of the lights, it's like a rainbow pattern almost.
Right.
Are you aware of cases like this, and have you wondered what might be the purpose, if any, that this type of light configuration would have? Because I can't.
Question. I call this case the Vanity light case, and to my knowledge, I have not heard of any other case that has multicolored flashing lights that would revolve in this manner. I haven't seen anything in a circular craft that resembles this configuration.
I was wondering about 1 or 2 maybe Hudson Valley cases of the 80s where I think that there were configurations similar to this.
A little bit.
Yeah. And then this is a nice, interesting case of alien, or I don't want to say alien necessarily, but writing that, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it alien writing, because that's sure as heck what it looks like here. This pattern, these symbols around each lights. This obviously had to be very close to her for her to get a good look at those patterns.
Yeah, she was very close to it. It was directly above her. And she described these as curved lines, loops, dots, and dashes. That's the best way she described it.
Yeah. I've never heard of this case before, but this was one collected by the late Wendell Stevens, who, for those people who may not know, Wendell Stevens was a United States Air Force colonel who was himself a UFO experienced pilot with the Air Force and had UFO sightings, and did major investigations of just countless cases. Over the years, collected UFO photographs. And of course, after he passed away, his library was donated to the organization Open Minds. And it's a massive library. So that's Wendell Stevens. Anything else that you want to say about this case, Michael?
Just as the case ended, it actually went down Main Street and departed at a slow rate of speed, and that was essentially this case.
No sound, I can assume?
No sound. Mm-mm.
Danielson, Connecticut. Very interesting, up close and personal sighting. So if the next one is what I'm thinking, this is Actually, this is reminiscent of the one we just talked about, only even more dramatic. Is this New
It's
Zealand?
This is going to be New Zealand, correct? Mm-hmm.
Let's go.
Okay, so July 13th, 1959. It's 5:50 a.m. Blenheim, New Zealand. The source is NICAP, and then a book called Challenge to Science: The UFO Enigma by Jacques Vallée, published in 1966, and it's page 24 to 25. So that's the reference to this one. Primary eyewitness is a woman by the name of Frederick Moreland, and she was helping her husband on their 9-acre farm. She was actually milking the cows when this actually took place. And what she saw approaching her location was kind of these two beaming spotlights that were green in color. And this actually descended rapidly to her location. She got, pretty frightened, so she jumped over to these trees that were in her vicinity. And what she ended up seeing was this strange saucer-shaped craft that was 25 feet in diameter. It was 8 feet high. It had this rectangular, curved edges, bubble transparency canopy on top of the craft. So not the dome that we're really familiar with, but more of an elongated, rectangular, transparent canopy on the top. Inside, there were two beings that appeared to be facing each other, essentially, is what the report talked about. And what's interesting is that there were two counter-rotating jets with tongues of flames coming out of the jets. And this was revolving, one on top, one on the bottom, but actually counter-rotating. It was hovering about 15 feet off the ground. And then all of a sudden, the jet stopped, and a light was flipped on for some reason. We don't know exactly how. And she could see these beings in this transparent canopy. One of these beings stood up and kind of placed his hands near the transparent wall like he was looking down back at her. And she described these beings as having this Mercury astronaut, kind of like a loose-fitting flight suit, something that Gordon Cooper would have worn, our Mercury astronauts.
Yes.
And they had helmets that came all the way down to their shoulders. So not the typical astronaut helmet, but the strange kind of like a half elliptical helmet that went down to their shoulders. One of the men stood up. He was inside the craft. We talked about that. And at this point, before this craft departed, the report indicates that one of these beings exited the craft, and she had a close encounter with one of these beings, which I think is very interesting. She described it again as this Mercury astronaut suit. It had two bulges sticking out of its chest on the front part of the flight suit, and there was a dial right in the center of his chest. There was at least two pipes or cylinders that were connected to these bulges that led up to the bottom portion of the elliptical-shaped helmet. And she said it had this pentagon-shaped glass cutout window where she could see the face of a man. That's what she described. Somehow,
it's completely
later on,
human here.
Yeah,
looks
later
totally
on,
human.
this being went back into the craft. The light flipped off, and then there was this kind of a high-pitched noise. The craft tilted to an angle. The jet started up again, so you've got these counter-rotating tongues of flame that started up again, and then this thing shot off vertically at a very high rate of speed and made no sonic boom. All back in 1959.
In New Zealand, so rather remote from the perspective of most of us. What was the interaction like that she described for this man?
She said that this being spoke to her in a language that she couldn't decipher, and that was it. That was essentially the interaction.
Fascinating.
What's interesting, too, though, is that on the left arm, the hand tapered back to a cone, like you'd see those orange construction cones on a road construction site. That's what this looked like. And there's at least 3 other cases of these cone hands that I've heard about.
I was looking at this before we talked. You were nice enough to send me these images beforehand, and I wondered if this was simply a case where it's temporarily attached to his hand, like as a tool, and you just can't see his fingers and thumb, because his right hand looks completely normal, or it looks.
That's what I'm thinking too.
Fairly normal. This is like Jean-Luc Picard when he was with the Borg. Just a little bit there. Very odd. One thing I noticed now, the depiction of this man, of course, Tom Bogan is going off of her description. So, when one sees or hears of encounters that people will claim with alleged Nordic aliens, they are all physically perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, perfect skin. They don't have wrinkles. They're all in perfect physical shape. This astronaut looks like, or this individual looks like he's in good shape, but he looks old or he looks weathered. And I'm wondering if that was artistic license by Tom Bogan or if that is in her report.
I think he looked a lot more human than he did alien. So it appears
Right.
that this could have been some type of man-made craft.
Yeah.
Like this high-pitched drilling noise or the whining noise, that was also repeated in the 1966 Temple, Oklahoma case too. And that's the one that had the designation TL4768 written on the side of the craft. So,
which actually, yes, we discussed at
yep.
some length when we did this before. May I ask you, Michael, do you have an opinion on the status of man-made UFO tech in the 1950s? Where do you think we were at, we meaning human beings, were we creating viable UFO flying saucer type craft? And is that what we're looking at here?
Well, the legend goes, and according to the newspaper articles, that quote unquote a breakthrough was made October 1954. And the newspaper clippings seem to point that out. Just how far they got is difficult to answer, but if you look at the research of Linda Moulton Howe, she talks about how the U.S. Navy and the Atomic Energy Commission combined were heading up the UFO research, including propulsion systems. So they could have done something, and I think they have. I will definitely go on record stating that, yes, something was probably done, mid-1950s. And this could have been the result of one of these craft.
Yes, I mean, it would certainly be possible. I suppose one thing I keep wondering is, well, the question really answers itself. What is the mission of these craft? They were not used in warfare. They were not used during the Cold War. There's no evidence that I'm aware of that they were used following the Cold War in any of America's wars that have been fought since then. So I suppose the mission would be to go out there. But if that's the case, then what are they doing landing in New Zealand?
Right. And why does the craft have counter-rotating tongues of flame like it's a gyroscopic stabilizer for the craft itself? And then it's tilting to one side before it stabilizes itself, and then it takes off. So, why would it need to do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting, question of engineering, aerodynamics, aviation. Does that fit with any theories you have as to how these craft might have been built? Or does it seem different or odd?
Well,
and the other thing, let me just say this. The variety of, like, let's say there was a breakthrough in 1954, because I'm absolutely willing to accept that. But during the 50s, we have to ask, how advanced could the manufacturing infrastructure of these flying saucers develop within the space of 5 years between 1954 and 1959? How many varieties would they be building during those few years? I would have to think like no variety or very little variety. Like they're just discovering this, and yet we are seeing a fairly wide variety of craft. And by the way, some of these are not tiny. This one that she's got looking at here in 1959 seems fairly large.
Right. It's a pretty large craft.
I mean, I just don't. I have a hard time. Like, I can accept that there would be some human infrastructure for this, but it's difficult for me. I just have to admit this to you, to accept that a human infrastructure so rapidly could develop such a wide-ranging, varied, sophisticated set of flying saucers that are going to be seen landing all over the world within a few years. It doesn't make sense to me, and I haven't been able to figure it out. But when we see these things and we see completely human-looking occupants, I have to agree, like, it's a problem to figure out what that means. So
Well, it's just
It's a
like
puzzle.
either just before these things take off, there's always this high pitch drilling noise or there's a whining noise. And in Lonnie Zamora case, there was two thumps that took place just before this thing took off. So like they're engaging an apparatus to start taking off. That's what
Yeah.
it sounds like to me.
Right. Yes, I would agree. One might imagine that extraterrestrials might be using, mechanical engineering solutions to some of their problems as well, just like humans. So maybe that's the case as well. You're leaning toward human, I think.
Well, in some of these cases, I think I am, yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm keeping an open mind because I think there could be a previously unknown high-tech civilization that's been here for thousands of years, and they might be using this too.
Heck yeah.
They might be using this too. And then we keep on hearing, Richard, that a lot of these craft, they on the back side of where they're standing, these quote unquote beings, there's a
Right.
display screen with monitors and buttons and switches and dials, and then there's levers that these guys are pulling down with their hands. We keep hearing that. There's a case in 1970, that hospital, the nurse case, where she looked outside the hospital window and parked right outside the window was a flying saucer, and then one of these beings pulled this lever, and then this thing flew away. So it's almost like this mechanical or hydraulic pneumatic system they're using.
Interesting indeed. Well, I think your next case is a 1970 case from
Correct.
Finland, and this one doesn't look like a normal human occupant case. So
Right.
why don't we jump into that one?
Okay. So it's January 7th, 1970, Finland, 2:45 p.m. The reference for this is Swedish UFO group called GICOFF. That's the Gothenburg Information Center for Unidentified Flying Objects. That's kind of the reference. Village of Imjärvi in Finland. That's where this took place. Primary eyewitnesses were two men, 36, Arno Heinonen, and 38, Esko Viljo. Those are the two primary eyewitnesses. What they ended up seeing was a cloud coming from the north. It kind of made this wide sweeping maneuver and approached their location. It emitted this strong light, which kind of transformed into this reddish or grayish fog in their location. The cloud descended to about 15 meters off the ground right in front of them, and then they saw this round vehicle descend from the cloud, and it was hovering about 9 feet off the ground. It was about 10 feet in diameter. It had a half sphere on the top, which was the dome, and then three smaller spheres that looked just like our good contact case. So there were
George
three,
Adamski.
yep, George Adamski, three half spheres
Exactly
on
like
the
it.
bottom.
Yes.
As we mentioned, a dome on the top. And this thing was so close, according to one of the skiers, that he could hit it with his ski pole. That's how close he was.
Yes.
There was this intense
Interesting.
beam of light that came down from the craft, from the bottom of the craft, hit the ground, and it was at this point where they saw the quote-unquote creature. This is how they described it. It looked like a typical garden gnome, or I've kind of added the fact here that it might have resembled something that you would see out of a Hobbit novel. That's what this thing
Yes.
looked like. It had an aged, wrinkled face. We've heard this before. It had claw-like fingers, stood about 3 feet tall, and was wearing a tight-fitting green flight suit and then darker green tight-fitting boots. And it also had this crooked nose in the front of it as well. So a strange looking being, but here's the weird part. He was holding this black colored box right in front of his stomach, and it had a lens on the front of it, and he was moving or pointing this camera to each of these skiers like he was taking a photograph from one to the other. He would move back and like take a photograph. Then there was this big sparking light that kind of illuminated the whole area. There was a flash, and then the being was gone, the craft was gone, and one of the eyewitnesses became very ill. His right foot, so there was a lot of physiological effects. His right foot began to become completely numb. He had to get out of his skis and then walk back with the other eyewitness like an hour back. And at that point, he started vomiting. He had massive headaches, and it also says that his urine looked like black coffee. So there was a lot of physiological effects to this case.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know what to say about this, except there are a number of cases of craft that are described virtually identically to the classic George Adamski type of flying saucer that people always have loved to debunk Adamski, and there are many problems with Adamski stories. I'm not here to defend that man, but it remains to be true that there are quite a few sightings of craft that look just like that, and here's one.
Yeah, we've seen this depiction before. That has come up multiple times.
Do you have a theory? I don't mean to put you on the spot,
right,
as we discussed this, but as to how this craft, like, why would it be shaped the way that it is? Is there a theoretical purpose of the round balls that are on the bottom of the craft, for example? Have you ever wondered about this?
I've wondered about it, Richard, but I just don't know what the purpose is. I just don't know. We've seen it multiple times. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but this case was reported in a number of foreign UFO magazines, so I think we can rest on it. I think we can bank on it. This is something that actually took place. And, just because it's weird doesn't mean it didn't happen, because when you look at some of the books that David Marler has in his collection, he's got an entire book, very thick, about these foreign being sighting cases, and every conceivable configuration, even the Russian one in '89, that doesn't conform to anything we know about.
No, that is a roughly 9-10 foot tall being with
correct.
The tiniest head imaginable.
That's right.
Now, this particular being from this Finland case, he's about 3 feet tall. He's got a helmet that makes him look like his head is in the shape of a cone, but that just could be the top, I suppose. It just could be the hat, for all we know. But it was evident as to how he appeared. Like, I'm wondering if this is some kind of projection or an image. Like, how would he have gotten down? I suppose the witnesses didn't see that, right? It's not evident to me how he would have gotten in and out.
In this reddish gray fog, and he emerged from the shaft of light that came from the bottom of the craft. He just, boom, he was there.
They didn't see how that happened. And
I don't think they could see how he actually descended.
How did he leave? Did we discuss that?
Yeah, there was this sparking area that came around that shaft of light, and there was this big blinding flash, and that's the point where this guy started having this numb feeling on his right leg, and it just deteriorated from there. They barely made it back.
So they they weren't paying attention to how the being re-entered the craft, for example?
I don't think so. Okay. It was just a violent encounter at the end here.
Michael, let's take a very quick break, and we're going to come right back. I'm Richard Dolan here with historian Michael Schratt. We're talking about some fascinating, forgotten mostly, UFO cases, and we're going to be right back here on KGRA Radio. We're back. I'm Richard Dolan here with historian Michael Schratt. We're talking about forgotten UFO cases, many of which are landing cases or near landing cases, and many of which involve sightings of beings who were inside these craft. Not all of them, but many of them. So, Michael, where are we headed for next?
Okay, Richard, you might know something about this case because it's in your neck of the woods, perhaps. October 9th, 1972, Long Island, New York. The source material for this is UFO Investigator, February 1973. This is on a lonely stretch of the road between Smithtown and Coram, 7:30 p.m. So the couple had just left their home. They're driving eastbound, and both saw this white light basically coming to their location, and the wife actually got a better view of this than the husband. So what ended up happening is she actually got out of the car when this light got closer, and she walked across the highway to the oncoming lane and kind of stood in the middle of the oncoming lane. And what they described seeing was this elliptical shaped craft with a straight cutout back section. This looked like a flying iron. It was very dark black gunmetal in color, just almost reflected no light, very black in color. Now on the posterior side of this craft, there were two poles sticking up on either side, and they tapered as they got to the top. And there was this wire that connected both the poles. Now, the husband, remained in the car. He only saw it through the driver's side window. But, when she got out, she got a much better look at this craft. Now, the bottom of the craft had these elongated, I guess you could call them bright white lit windows. There were 5 on either side, and there was a red light on the left side and a green light on the right side. And this thing slowly departed the area, but they got a very good look at the bottom of this craft, and there's a 10-page audio transcript that describes this in great detail.
Oh, I didn't know about this case. I actually was a 10-year-old boy not far from this. I did not live far from Smithtown, New York. I was in the town of Brentwood, which is a short drive. So it's very interesting. It was indeed in my neck of the woods, but I didn't know about it then, and I didn't know about it afterward. It's an interesting craft for sure. I mean, it is shaped like a flat iron.
Yes, that's right.
When you really look at the aerodynamics of this, there's no obvious way that this thing could be in the air. So I'm wondering if the lights are, sometimes we refer to them as windows, but I'm wondering if it's some kind of plasma energy. Like, is it a result of the energy generation that might create the anti-gravitic effect of the craft? My science isn't that good on this.
She described there being a pulsating white light like a heartbeat on the front of the craft. That's what she described there.
And it looks like it would be too small for a human being to fit inside it, unless
I agree.
So you could stand on top of it and hold on to the rail. That's about the best I could think. And I wouldn't want to be perched on that, frankly. So it makes me think we're looking at a drone of some sort.
I don't think this is a manned craft. No, I don't think so. But she also made the comment.
I mean, I didn't want to say a manned drone, but some kind of uninhabited automated craft.
She said, quote, "The craft looked homemade in appearance, like someone built it in their garage."
You got to be kidding.
Yep, that's what she said. I've got the transcript. She talks about this like this thing was homemade for sure.
And yet it's just flying low without any visible means of propulsion.
That's correct. That's
correct. a nice garage project.
They also interviewed the husband as well on tape too. So they got both of them independently.
How did this object depart? Did they
it slowly departed the area. It did not take off like a spark on a grinding wheel.
Could we hypothesize? I'm trying my best to come up with some kind of conventional anything for this. Could there have been a balloon that could be in the shape of this type of object that could just float off? It seems unlikely to me to the extreme.
I suppose, but this is a very strange configuration. It looked a lot flatter than any balloon that we know.
No, indeed. And did you say or did you not say if it hovered in a still?
Yeah, it definitely stopped. It definitely stopped near their location. Yeah, they got a very good look at the bottom of the craft.
That would rule out a balloon, I think. I can't imagine a balloon doing that. I'm stumped on this one, other than some kind of non-man-made technology. Yeah.
It's a strange bird, at the very least. It's a strange bird.
Absolutely. Fascinating case. And yes, I know the area quite well.
How far is that from you, Richard?
I grew up maybe less than 10 miles from there.
10 miles. Wow. Okay.
Right. Very, very close. Smithtown, I'd been there many times. So, yes, I knew it quite well. Let's keep going here. You've got a couple of other cases, including, I want to get to the, I think in 2 cases from now, we've got the Canary Islands where there's beings. Sure. But before that, we have another one you want to talk about from California.
Yep. So this is Dana Point, California, December 1976. Came from the QFOS archive, so I was able to unearth that one. 7:30 p.m. So it's the mother and 2 children. The daughter was 16. The son was 3. And we know the exact model of car they were driving. It was a 1976 Pontiac Grand Prix. All 3 of them saw this rather large, approximately 50-foot diameter dish-shaped craft go right by their windshield, right outside their car. This thing was hovering in front of their vehicle, but they could see it right outside their windshield. and they described it, Richard, as quote-unquote a fat frisbee. It had hundreds of these multicolored flashing micro processing lights along the outer circumference of the craft and then up near the top of it. At the very top, there was a red flashing light, and we talked about the processing lights. So she rolled down the window, heard no noise whatsoever. They all saw the craft for about 5 minutes, and then after the 5 minutes, this thing did a strange maneuver. It tipped up 90 degrees and rolled away like a wagon wheel and headed toward the coast.
It's an incredible craft.
Yep.
There are a very few cases of craft with massive numbers of lights on it, but this depiction is might be the record for any that I've ever seen.
As far as lights are concerned, yeah. And I also have another case from Detroit where another eyewitness saw another fat frisbee. So it's not an isolated incident.
I'm trying to process the variety of these craft. You know, it's true that auto manufacturers make different designs of cars, and larger and smaller, and you could hypothesize that there are different designs of these types of craft as well. I just keep wondering, are the different designs emblematic of one civilization that's simply quite inventive and keeps coming up with new designs, or is it of different groups that have their own unique design that they prefer? And I guess none of us know the answer to that one.
It's varied, to say the least.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's an interesting case. I'm glad we've got that one depicted here. Where do we want to go next?
That's going to be Canary Island.
Let's do it. This is a really interesting case. This is one that I have looked into quite a lot, and I think a lot of researchers are familiar with this case. And for the record, 1976 was a very significant year of some dramatic UFO sightings worldwide. And this one on the Canary Islands is one of my personally most interesting cases that I know of.
Okay.
So let's go in.
Sure. It's the night of June 22nd, 1976, off the coast of the Canary Islands. And what I thought was interesting to basically put forth is this was part of the unidentified flying objects briefing document, the best available evidence, written by Don Berliner and Antonio Huneeus. So they get credit for this. And it was Antonio who transcribed the original documents into English. So if it wasn't for Antonio, we might never even know about this case.
I really think it's good to give a shout out to Antonio Huneeus, who is one of the best UFO researchers ever. The work that he did really through the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and beyond has just been some of the best ever. And he's from the nation of Chile and has been an incredible resource of Spanish language UFO reports for a long time. So, and this is one of them. Yeah, he brought to the attention of the English-speaking world.
Yep. And this was the document that was basically financed by Rockefeller. So we believe that this document was handed to John Gibbons, who was Clinton's science advisor, and that was probably handed over to President Clinton. And then Hillary saw it too. So I think it's fairly safe to say, what do you think, Richard? Do you think Bill Clinton saw this report?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yes.
Definitely think so. There's no question that Bill Clinton had and has interest and probably some knowledge of the UFO phenomenon. He's talked about it, not just publicly, but privately. I know that he's talked about it privately. It's come back to me from a couple of different sources. And the best word on the subject is that whatever he thought he could do about UFOs, his hands were tied and he wasn't able to do a thing about it.
Yeah.
That's the word. And I think that's true. But let's go into the Canary Islands case.
Yep.
This is a fascinating. This is off the coast of Spain going into the Atlantic Ocean. And it was a night of really extraordinary sightings by many people. So
that's right.
Walk us through this.
So, the first sighting was by the crew of a Spanish naval war vessel called the Atrevida. And they were 3 miles off the coast of a location called Punta Lentilla. That's where they actually saw it, off the island of Future Eventura. Hard to describe these terms, but that's essentially the island that they first saw it. And what they described seeing was this illuminated orb, and then it grew in size and glowed to the entire area. It was actually coming from the east and moving toward the west. it was described by a lot of eyewitnesses. There were 3 primary eyewitnesses that saw what we can talk about later. But we talked about here, it moved from the east to the west. Was hovering over the northern part of Gran Canary Island at a location called Las Rosas. That's where the primary part of this took place. It was an incredible sighting, witnessed by one woman, a doctor, and a taxi cab driver. The doctor was Dr. Francisco Julio Padron Leon. That's who actually saw this. And what they described seeing was this gigantic electric blue colored transparent soap bubble. Looked like a glass bubble, 20 feet in diameter. It was hovering about 2 meters off the ground. The entire area grew cold in color, cold in temperature, and the radios cut out. So right there, it's a CE2, right there. It's a CE2 case right there. What they saw inside this bubble is very interesting. There was a platform, and on top of this platform were these 3 contoured or curved consoles. The 2 on the left looked fairly plain, but the one in the center had these control levers coming off the left and right hand side. So there were 2 control levers coming off the left and right hand side. There were 9-foot tall beings that had these tight fitting red flight suits. They had black colored helmets on them. And the report says that their hands tapered back to almost a cone, which is identical to the other case that we had talked about. So there appears to be this pattern recognition. In the center part of this craft, on top of this platform, there was a clear, transparent cylinder that rose from the bottom of the platform up to almost the top of the bubble, but didn't reach the top of the bubble. And inside of this cylinder was this blue colored smoke that was filling the interior of the craft itself. Not too long after that, all 3 eyewitnesses, they saw this brilliant spark or glow, and then the craft was gone. So essentially, in a nutshell, that's what this case is representing.
It's a totally bizarre case.
Yeah.
I have to confess, I had missed the detail of the bulging back part of the head. What I certainly recall is that they were 9 to 10 feet tall estimate. Very, very, and kind of long and slender build. The depiction that I thought I remembered was that they had more of a roundish helmet, but that could just be me misremembering it. So this is an interesting depiction if they indeed had the bulges in the back of the head. So that's quite fascinating. I don't know if he meant to, but they almost have the Mars Attacks look.
Yeah. Well, they were definitely a black colored helmet on top with the red flight suit. Mm-hmm.
There was an attempt to explain this by the UFO skeptic James Oberg a few years later, in describing that the United States was launching missiles in the Atlantic Ocean at that general time. I was willing to listen to his explanation, but it really never struck me as viable, particularly when you get, these very, very up close and personal sightings by quite a few witnesses. It's one thing to have the Navy vessel see this object from a distance, and I suppose you could hypothesize that maybe it was some kind of unusual test by the U.S. Navy, although I'm even dubious about that. But when you start looking at the witness testimony of the people on the ground, I can't really square that with kind of U.S. Navy test. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's a heck of a case. So I'm glad you were able to get that one depicted.
I don't think it's talked about much, Richard. It really hasn't been discussed much in ufology, really.
I guess I thought it was a better known case at the time. I found it interesting, and I've talked about it a number of times. But now that I think of it, I hadn't really heard too many other people discuss it. So I'm very glad it got a visual treatment. We've got about 10 minutes or so for this segment of our program, Michael. It always flies by. What are the cases you want to get into? How many more can we do?
Well, we could do 2 more if you want.
I'm game.
Okay, let's go over to 94. Let's do 94. This is November 1994. We don't have the exact date in November. This comes from Burton Daily Mail, February 17th, 1995. Early in the morning, near Repton, England, primary eyewitness was driving to work. and he kind of approached this diversion around a bridge, and he looked up and saw two beaming spotlights coming out of this elliptical shaped craft. It appeared to be about 60 feet across. It had a notch cut out at the back. And then he described seeing what looked like tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the vehicle. He was going to work in the morning, so he's kind of like driving alone. But this is something that we're hearing again and again. These pipes, cylinders,
Yes.
could be like silencers. Many eyewitnesses report these things looking like the inside of a Midas muffler shop. That's what this thing looked like on the bottom of it. It was fairly quiet. He didn't report any large noises. It paced him for about 2 miles and then slowly departed the area. And that's this November 94 Repton, England case. But that area during that time seemed to be a flap, and they likened it to an air show going on with all these different UFO configurations in the same vicinity at the same time frame.
One of the most confusing things to anyone who looks at these types of cases is trying to understand the behavior of the individuals operating these craft. You know, like, what is the purpose of this?
Right.
Why would these objects be seen where they are? Where are they going? What are they doing? What is the mission? Is there a mission? Are they joyriding? There's not a good, easy explanation. If it's a classified program, for example, would it make any sense to operate these craft in full view of the public time and time again?
That is a good point.
It's not easy to square the circle in these cases. And if it's other beings from elsewhere, you could guess maybe they don't care if they're seen once in a while. Maybe they don't. And they just go about their business. And as far as what they're doing, it's a whole other mystery. We just don't know.
Right.
I like asking you because you're someone else who looks into these, and maybe you've got your own opinions.
I just try to form a conclusion by looking at all the different cases and looking at the pattern recognition that you see between them. And then you can start piecing this together.
Well, I mean, we could spend an entire lifetime doing that, and I'm not sure if we would really come to a viable conclusion on some of these. There's just so much variety. But again, that is the problem. People are, they might complain that UFOs don't fit their preconceived ideas how aliens should behave, or even how black budget projects should be. The truth is, the UFO phenomenon does not behave. It doesn't conform to the norms that we would expect anything to behave, whether it's classified programs or extraterrestrials. So we still have a long way to go in terms of learning what this phenomenon is. We probably got time for one more good.
Yeah, let's do one more. That's fine. All right, so it's April-May 2001. Actually interviewed the primary eyewitness on this case. This is Chicago O'Hare Airport, 2:30 a.m. There were 4 eyewitnesses, and they were working at a place called the Ozark Warehouse on O'Hare Airport. It rained earlier in the morning, so this is 2:30 a.m. And what they recalled seeing is a very interesting craft that was 50 feet in diameter, hovering off the ground about 30 feet above the tarmac area. Mm-hmm. Now, from the side, it looked like a cigar-shaped craft, but it was actually circular in shape. It had 12 illuminated windows, or approximately 12, running along the side of the craft. There was a slight illuminated, quote-unquote, cockpit at the front, and there was kind of a small porthole or circular, I guess you could call, entryway on the top of the craft. He said the thing was very smooth. It had no rivets, almost no seams whatsoever. But then the most unusual feature of this craft were these strange octopus tentacles that were moving from side to side near the back of the craft like they were alive. And there was at least a 12-inch diameter sphere or ball attached to the end of these tentacles. And these things were moving around. This has come up at least 12 separate times in different cases as well. At this point, they heard this low-frequency rumbling noise at the far end of the airport on one of the active runways. A 747 was on takeoff roll. This craft went right by an active runway, and then the 747 took off. So we could have had a massive midair collision with, perhaps 300 people dead if there was a collision here. But this thing passed by just as this thing was taking off. So this is the April 2001 Chicago O'Hare Airport case.
Yes, I'm glad you brought this one up. Of course, many people are aware of the 2006
Right.
Chicago O'Hare UFO sighting. So here we are 5 years earlier with another case that could have involved a catastrophic collision and deaths of hundreds of people. The antenna at the rear of this craft,
Yes.
again, do you have any theories as to what that would be, what purpose those would serve?
I think could be some type of a spark gap mechanism, because this has come up in at least 12 different cases where there's these prongs coming out of these craft, kind of like the Tic Tac UFO, and there's a ball at the end of them. There's some type of tentacle or spire or stinger coming off these craft with balls at the end of them. At least 12 separate cases.
So you say spark gap, do you mean something like analogous to a spark plug of an automobile?
Well, some type of Tesla coil, some type of discharging device associated with a high electro field, some type of a electrical field, high voltage.
Well, that makes more sense than anything else that I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Like they're dissipating a charge. That's what it sounds like.
Now, the question would be, so this would be evidence perhaps of some kind of Tesla-based technology, which might very well indicate human manufacture. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. Definitely.
Where would a human infrastructure be to build these, in your opinion? Do you have any one place or any couple of places that you think it would exist?
Well, according to Tony Gonzalez, the late Tony Gonzalez, who's another ufologist that has not been given the credit that he deserves, definitely something on the East Coast. Where else? Don't know for sure. MacDill Air Force Base could be one. Don't know for sure, Richard.
So where they would be building them, and then perhaps a whole other question, what would they be doing with them? You know, what I would like to do with you is, when I get you back here, we should just have a discussion as to where we think a human UFO infrastructure would be located. I don't know if you're prepared for that one.
Now you're getting into the crux of the matter.
I think we need to get into that, because I think that there are UFOs that don't belong to us, but I think that there are definitely UFOs that probably do belong to us at this point. And where they're being made, what their missions are, what they're all about, that's a question. Hey, Michael, so you are one of these UFO researchers who does amazing work, and you don't really seem to care if you have a website out there or not. You've got a great book, but it's almost impossible for people to find. What's the best way for people to find you if they are interested in reaching you?
Well, the book was for years on MUFON's website. I'll have to talk to Marquetta to see if they can put it back on, but it's been available for years on there. Just by email, I guess, is the best way. And again, like we mentioned them before, to me, Richard, it's a crusade. You could never do this for money. It has to be something that you really have a passion for.
Well, Michael, it's a pleasure always to be talking with you about these cases. They are forgotten cases that you and your team revive. And they, raise more questions than they answer in many cases. But the questions they raise, I must say, are worth our time.
Yeah, the ultimate goal is just to maintain an important part of our national history. That is the goal. Just make these cases come alive rather than let them sit in some warehouse, dusty and forgotten for decades. We just got to make these cases come alive. That's the goal.
Totally agree with you. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks for listening. For more information about what I'm up to, please go to richarddolanmembers.com or check out my YouTube channel. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.